All right, let's dive into this Hunter's AD 1492. Today, we're going to focus on actually, playing the game. We're breaking down the mechanics, how the game flows,
Yeah, and all the good stuff.
all that good stuff so you can just jump right in and start mastering the mist, right?
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding how these quests work, because that's really the core of the game.
Okay, so let's say we're about to start a quest. What's our first move here?
First thing you got to do is grab that tome of quests, which is basically your rule book, your story, all that stuff for the game. Each quest will have what's called an introduction and a deployment section. That's going to get you started.
Okay, and speaking of deployment, what are we actually putting out on the table here? What are we looking at?
Well, you're going to open up the tome of maps, and there's a matching page for each quest. That map's going to show you the terrain that you're going to be, walking through and where to put your enemies. And speaking of enemies, you're going to need those too. Each enemy type has its own card, and right next to that, you're going to have a face-down deck of what are called action cards for that enemy. And those determine how that enemy behaves.
So these action cards, these are like driving the AI, essentially, for each enemy.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what about the players, the heroes? How do we get set up?
So each player is going to have what's called their hero board. And that's where you track your stats, your health, your equipment.
Okay.
Those stats are represented by little wooden cubes, and you get one for each attribute: strength, agility, knowledge, perception, and morale. And then whatever's left over after you put one on each of those, you use to track your health. Placement of those cubes is key because those attribute scores, those determine how good you are at different actions in the game. Everything from swinging a sword to even dodging an attack, depends on those.
Got it. So we've got our heroes, we've got our enemies out on the map, stats are set, we're ready to face the mist. What happens next? What's the flow of the game from here?
Well, the game is played in rounds, and the number of rounds per quest is actually specified in the Tome of Quests. Within each round, all of the heroes take their turns first, and then all of the enemies take their turns.
Okay, got it. So it's a back and forth, heroes then enemies. Let's break down a hero's turn. What can a hero actually do when it gets to their turn?
Each hero gets 2 actions on their turn. They can choose to play an action card from their hand, or they can take what's called a basic action.
Okay, so these action cards, these sound like where a lot of the strategy and the choices come in. What kind of things can these cards do?
Oh, all sorts of things. Action cards, they are the heart of the combat system, and they give you the most options by far. They are double-sided. There's an action at the top, and then there's what's called a reaction at the bottom. The action side, that could allow you to move further, attack with a bonus, maybe even heal yourself. It really depends on the card. And those reactions, those are interesting because those allow you to interrupt the normal flow of the game in response to certain triggers. Like, let's say an enemy is about to attack you. Well, the right reaction card could let you dodge out of the way.
That's cool. So action cards give you a lot of, flexibility, a chance to really kind of outsmart your enemies and stuff.
hmm
But what about those basic actions? When would you choose one of those over using a card?
So basic actions are your bread and butter moves. They're move one space, melee attack one enemy, ranged attack one enemy, and then there's interact. They're simple, they're reliable, and they don't require you to actually spend a card to use them. Sometimes you just need to, take a step back, reposition, or deliver a quick attack without burning through your good cards.
That makes sense. Now, when we look at the map in the Toma maps, it's not just a blank space, right? There's all these different terrain types to consider. How does that play into, the choices you make and how the game plays out?
Terrain is incredibly important. You've got walls, which block movement and line of sight. You have what's called hiding terrain, and these are places you can duck into to use the hide action, which is one of those basic actions. And you can try to, be invisible to your enemies. You have difficult terrain, which can really slow you down. It might even reduce your stats while you're slogging through it. Cover, which is your friend when it comes to ranged attacks because it gives you a defense bonus. And then we've got bottlenecks, vantage points, and what are called findings, all scattered around.
Well, that's a lot. So terrain really adds a lot of strategic depth to movement and combat.
Absolutely. You need to think about where you're going, what kind of cover you have, and how that terrain is going to affect both your actions and the actions of your enemies.
Okay, all this talk about combat is getting me ready for action. How does combat actually work?
All right, well, combat is where those action cards and basic actions really come into play. The first thing to know is that if you're in the same space as an enemy, you are considered engaged with that enemy.
Engage meaning?
Meaning you're basically in melee range. You can either perform what's called a parting leap, which will let you disengage and move away, or you can attack. But be warned that parting leap, it can be risky, because if you fail the roll, the enemy gets a free attack on you.
Ooh, so sometimes it's better to just stand and fight. Okay, so let's say we're going in for the attack. How does attacking work?
So attacking involves a few steps. First, you're going to choose the action card that you want to use for your attack.
Right.
Then you choose the weapon you're going to use. Each weapon comes with a token that shows how many dice you get to roll when you use that weapon.
Okay, so like a sword might have more dice than a dagger,
Yeah.
making it potentially more powerful. And I'm assuming these weapon tokens are easy to spot on the table.
Absolutely. They are these really sturdy cardboard squares, and they have a little image of the weapon on it and how many dice you roll. But even if you don't have a weapon, you can still try what's called an unarmed attack. You just roll fewer dice and you use half of your strength attribute, so it's not ideal.
Makes sense. You always want to have a weapon. Okay, so we've got our weapon. We're ready to roll those dice. What are we looking for?
Each die that rolls a result equal to or lower than your attack strength is considered a hit. And here's a cool little twist. If you roll a 1, you actually get to roll that die again. It's called the golden rule, and it can really turn the tide of a battle in your favor.
Yeah, that's a nice little bonus there.
Mm.
Okay, so we've rolled our dice, got our hits. What's the next step?
So now you compare your total attack strength to the enemy's defense, which is listed on their little enemy card. If your attack is stronger, you deal damage equal to the difference. Damage is tracked with those small square tokens, and you put those right on the enemy card. You bring that enemy's health down to 0, they are out of the fight. Now, remember how I mentioned each weapon has its own characteristics and stuff? Well, that's where things get interesting. Those traits, they can make a big difference in combat.
Give me an example. What kind of weapon traits are we talking about here?
Okay, so take the longsword, for example.
Huh.
It has a trait called pierce. What that does is it lowers the enemy's defense, making it easier to hit them. Or, you might have a bow with the burn trait, which means that if you hit with that bow, you're going to have the enemy's defense against that specific attack. So it's,
Brutal.
Yeah.
So choosing the right weapon, it's not just about how many dice it rolls, but it's about these tactical traits that it has. And I'm guessing you find new weapons as you play.
You can find them, but you can also craft them. That's one of the cool things about this game. You gather resources by completing tasks, defeating enemies, just generally exploring the world. And then you can use those resources to craft all sorts of gear, from weapons to armor to accessories.
Crafting. All right, now we're talking. Where does all this crafting magic happen?
Well, first you need to upgrade your wagon with a workshop. Think of your wagon like your mobile base camp. It's represented by the wagon board in the game. And you can upgrade it between quests to give you all sorts of benefits. The workshop upgrade, that's what you need if you want to craft.
Okay.
But there's also storage upgrades so you can carry more resources, or stable upgrades so you can move faster on the map, that kind of thing.
So the wagon is kind of like this shared resource for the players. Everyone contributes to upgrading it and everyone benefits.
Exactly. It's a really cool way to encourage teamwork and strategic planning, because you have to decide as a group which upgrades are going to benefit you the most.
Very cool. So we've talked about combat, we've talked about crafting. What about just exploring the world? What can we expect to find out there in the mist?
So the world of Hunters AD 1492 is made up of these map cards, and each one represents a different area. And scattered across these maps, you're going to find what are called settlements. They have a little house icon on them, and they are essentially like havens of civilization where you can rest, heal, gather information, and even pick up new tasks.
Settlements sound like a welcome sight after, you've been battling monsters for a while. What happens when you enter a settlement?
When you land on a map card with a settlement, you get to choose which location cards to explore. These represent different buildings within the settlement, like a blacksmith, a tavern, maybe a temple. Each location card offers different services or opportunities, you might find new gear for sale, you might pick up rumors and leads for your investigation, or maybe even stumble into a dangerous encounter.
So it's like, choosing which shops to visit in the town. You never know what you're going to find. Speaking of not knowing what you're going to find, I've noticed these road cards in the game box. What are those all about?
Oh, road cards. Those represent the random encounters that you might face as you travel between those map cards. They add an element of surprise and danger to your journey. So each map card has a Roman numeral on it. And that Roman numeral, that indicates the level of danger in that area.
So a higher Roman numeral means a riskier journey.
Exactly. And that level determines which pile of road cards you draw from. Level I road cards, they're pretty tame. Maybe you run into a helpful traveler or just a minor obstacle. But those level 3 cards,
Ooh.
Those can throw some serious curveballs your way, like an ambush by bandits or a terrifying encounter with, like a powerful monster.
So even traveling between locations is a strategic decision. Do you prioritize speed or do you take a safer route but it takes longer? You
Yeah.
know, I love that. It adds this whole like risk reward to exploration.
Yeah. And you also have those task cards we talked about. Those are like little mini missions that you can pick up, usually in settlements. Maybe somebody needs you to deliver a message or clear out a monster nest or even solve a mystery.
Okay, so task cards sound like a great way to earn like extra rewards, extra experience, and also add some kind of cool little side stories to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best part is they often lead to, like unexpected discoveries. You might uncover hidden locations, gain valuable allies, or even find clues that help you unravel that main plot of the campaign.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so we've covered combat, we've covered crafting, exploration. What about like hero development? How do our characters get stronger and more capable as we play?
That's where experience points, or XP, come in. You gain XP by completing quests, overcoming challenges, generally just being awesome. And then you can spend those XP to improve your attributes, buy new action cards, or unlock additional equipment slots on your hero board.
Okay, so leveling up isn't just about becoming stronger. It's about gaining new abilities and becoming more like versatile. So what are some of the ways that you can customize your character as you level up?
Well, you can increase your strength attribute, which obviously makes you better in melee combat. Boosting your agility can make you harder to hit. Knowledge is important for using magic. Perception gives you an edge in ranged combat and initiative. And then you have morale, which is a little bit different. It's less about direct combat. It's more about like resisting fear and keeping your spirits up in, tough situations.
So there's a stat for every playstyle. And then you also mentioned you can buy these new action cards with your XP.
Mm-hmm.
How do those play into like customizing your character?
Action cards, that's where things get really interesting. So each hero starts with a basic deck of 10 cards, but you can expand that to 20 as you gain XP and find new cards. And there are so many different cards to choose from, each with its own unique actions and reactions.
It's like you're building your own deck of awesome abilities. You could focus on, offense, defense, support. The possibilities are endless.
Exactly. And that's what makes hero development so rewarding in this game. You're not just like leveling up, you're crafting a unique playstyle for your character, making them truly your own.
So we've talked about hero development,
Mm-hmm.
but there's another way to improve your chances out there in the mist: upgrading your wagon. We touched on this earlier with crafting. But what other benefits can you get from these wagon upgrades?
Wagon upgrades, those are essential for any successful hunting party. Besides the workshop, which is what you need for crafting, you can upgrade your storage, which will allow you to carry more resources. Trust me, you're going to need that space. And then there's stable upgrades, which boost your travel speed, which can be really crucial for reaching objectives quickly or, escaping a dangerous encounter.
It sounds like strategic resource management is a big part of this game.
Absolutely. You have to carefully consider how you spend your resources, whether it's on healing potions, weapon upgrades, or wagon improvements. Sometimes you got to make tough choices, sacrificing one thing to get another, but that's part of the challenge and the fun.
That's what separates the seasoned hunters from the rookies, knowing when to save, when to spend, when to take a risk.
Now, let's talk about something that trips up a lot of new players: line of sight, or LOS. This is super crucial for ranged combat. You can only attack an enemy with a ranged weapon if you have a clear line of sight to them, meaning there's no walls or obstacles in the way. To check line of sight, imagine drawing a straight line from the center of your space to the center of the enemy's space. If that line is clear, you're good to go.
Okay, so line of sight, it's all about like clear paths, no shooting around corners.
Right.
What about those terrain features we talked about earlier? Do those affect line of sight at all?
Yeah, definitely. Like walls, they completely block line of sight, so you can't target anyone who's hiding behind a wall. Hiding terrain is interesting because if an enemy is successfully hidden, they're considered to have no line of sight to anyone, even if there technically is like a clear path. And then you've got things like vantage points, which actually extend your line of sight, allowing you to target enemies from, further away.
Okay, so using terrain to your advantage or, knowing when you're at a disadvantage, so that's a big part of combat. Now, with all this fighting going on, our heroes are bound to take some damage. How does healing work in the game?
There are a few ways to heal. First, you have your basic healing potions. which you can buy in settlements or sometimes find as loot. Those are represented by these little red tokens, and they restore a set amount of health. Then there are certain action cards that allow you to heal yourself or your allies. And finally, you can always just rest at a settlement, which will fully restore your health.
Okay, so there are options for, like, quick healing out in the field and then more substantial healing when you're back in civilization. But rest and healing, that takes time, right? How is time actually tracked in the game?
So time is tracked using these, they're called time tokens, and they have letters on them, A, B, C, and D. And certain actions will advance that time token, like resting at a settlement will advance it, certain card effects might advance it, and some quests actually even have time limits.
So you can't just, like, dawdle around out there in the mist. You got to keep track of the time.
Exactly. Time is a resource in itself, and managing it effectively is really crucial.
And that's where those wagon upgrades can come in handy again, right? Like
Yeah.
stable upgrades to speed up travel and reduce the time it takes to get between locations.
Yep.
It all ties together.
It really does. It's all about, making strategic decisions and thinking ahead. That's what makes this game so compelling.
Speaking of compelling, let's talk about the campaign structure a little bit. It's not just like a random series of quests, right?
Yeah.
There's an overarching story here.
Absolutely. The campaign is driven by what are called plot cards. And those are these larger cards that introduce new twists and challenges, kind of pushing that narrative forward. These plot cards are often triggered by exploring specific locations or completing certain quests.
So it's a little like those choose-your-own-adventure books, where your decisions determine what happens next.
Exactly. And that's what makes the campaign so replayable because, you can make different choices, you face different challenges, and experience the story in a whole new way. And sometimes those choices lead to some tough decisions. You might have to choose between, like, helping one group of people over another, or maybe make a sacrifice to achieve a greater goal, that kind of thing.
It's those moments of, like, moral dilemma that really add some depth to the game.
Yeah.
It's not just rolling dice and fighting monsters. You're actually shaping the story, making choices that have real consequences.
Yeah.
Heavy stuff.
It can be, but it's also super rewarding to see how your choices play out and how they affect the world around you.
I bet. Now, I know you don't want to spoil anything, but can you give us a general sense of, like, what kind of enemies we'll be facing out there in this mist-shrouded world?
Let's just say that the Bestiary in Hunter's AD 1492 is very diverse. You're going to be facing everything from, like, savage humanoids to terrifying monsters, creatures that can, shift their shape and deceive you. And then you've got the demonic entities, beings of pure darkness. And those will really test your strength and courage to the limit. Each enemy type has its own unique characteristics and abilities, so you'll need to adapt your strategies and tactics accordingly.
So it's not just hack and slash, right?
Yeah.
You need to know your enemy, exploit their weaknesses,
Yep.
use your strengths to your advantage. And that's where those weapon traits and action cards can really come into play.
Speaking of action cards, let's talk a little bit more about those reactions. We touched on those earlier. They sound like a great way to, interrupt the flow of the game and really surprise your opponents. Reactions, they're one of the most satisfying mechanics in the game. They really let you feel like a cunning hunter. So those action cards, they're double-sided. And that bottom half, that's all about the reactions. And those reactions are triggered by specific events, like an enemy attack, a successful dodge, or even the time token advancing. They allow you to break the normal turn order and do something unexpected, like dodge an attack, heal an ally, or even launch a counterattack.
So timing is everything. Knowing when to play that reaction card and what kind of reaction to use, that could be the difference between, victory and defeat.
Exactly.
It adds another layer of strategic thinking to the game.
Precisely. And that's what keeps Hunter's AD 1492 so fresh and exciting. There are always new strategies to discover, new combinations of cards to try, new challenges to overcome.
Now, speaking of challenges, let's talk about some of the advanced combat mechanics that players might encounter. We talked about the parting leap earlier, which lets you disengage from an enemy and move away. But what if you're surrounded by multiple enemies? Things can get a little dicey, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you're engaged with multiple enemies, you got to be really careful. When you attempt a parting leap, each enemy you're engaged with gets what's called a penalty attack, meaning they get a free attack on you before you can escape. So it can be a risky maneuver, but sometimes it's the only way to break free and regroup.
Yeah, sometimes the best defense is a strategic retreat.
Sometimes that's the smartest move. And that's where teamwork comes in. If your allies are positioned well, they can help you disengage by, attacking the enemies that are surrounding you, forcing them to, focus on somebody else.
Yeah. So communication and coordination are key.
Yeah.
You can't just like charge in blindly and
Yeah.
expect to survive. You got to work together,
Right.
have a plan.
Yep. Yep.
And that's what makes cooperative games like this so fun, right? You're all in it together,
Yeah.
facing those challenges as a team.
Exactly. And when you pull off like a successful maneuver or a clutch victory against like overwhelming odds, there's no feeling quite like it. It's a shared triumph, a testament to your teamwork and your strategic skills.
And there you have it, a deep dive into the mechanics of Hunter's AD 1492. We covered combat, crafting, exploration, hero development, wagon upgrades, even those tricky line-of-sight rules. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to discover in this game, from that intricate plot to the hidden secrets just waiting to be uncovered.
So grab your rulebook, gather your fellow hunters, and prepare to face the mist. Who knows what adventures await you in the depths of this shadowy world?